Welcome back to the program. Joining us now is the economics editor at The Australian, Adam Creighton. Adam, good to see you once again. Holden, are you a little bit like the Prime Minister? You're disappointed but not surprised?
Yeah, look, that's basically the same here. Also somewhat nostalgic. I grew up in a bit of a car-mad family. I was a Ford man, but my dad and my brothers were Holden men, so it was a bit sad.
We won't hold that against you, Adam.
Okay, thanks. But look, it's not expected. I mean, the market share had fallen to something like 3%, I think, and on the demand side and the supply side, things had changed, and it was inevitable that they were going to pull out. So, yeah, it's sad, but not surprising.
Yeah, so, I mean, and that's, I think we were talking about this a little bit earlier. I was a bit the same. Was it the death knell for Holden when they moved manufacturing away from here back in 2017, Adam?
Well, look, it was certainly the death knell when the government quite rightly removed the billions in subsidies over many years that the company received. So I think that was one aspect. I think energy prices were one aspect. It's increasingly expensive to manufacture anything in Australia, not just cars, but of course, car manufacturing does use a lot of power. So I think that was the big change. Also, too, is just the competition from. Mainly from Asian cars that tended to be smaller and more fuel efficient. They're the cars that Australians wanted to buy.
Yeah.
There was an interesting piece, Adam, I read yesterday, and it suggested that the General Motors kind of stuffed this up too. They've got a big role to play in this. Back in 2004, 2005, when they invested a lot of money in sedans, right at the time when the interest and the shift of people was starting to move towards SUVs and larger type cars. So, I mean, in that sense, the company has a fair bit they have a significant amount of blame to take.
Yeah, certainly that's true. I mean, there was a brief point where the Commodore was being exported. I think it was called a Monaro to California and parts of the US. So,
that's right.
So that was a pipe dream that never paid off. Ultimately, I think it was successful for a few years, but then I think in the US as well, I think tastes are changing there as well. So look, it is General Motors' fault, but the reality is it's a foreign company, of course, General Motors, and it's got to make decisions in its own interest.
Sure.
It doesn't care for Australian jobs.
And if you're not driving a Holden, you can't blame anyone but yourself, really.
That's right.
There's no interest. Yeah. They're not going to sell them here.
Exactly.
Adam, before we let you go, we just want to talk about what we've seen yesterday with the New South Wales Treasurer having quite the crack at his federal colleagues on the same side of politics. You might call this a green on blue attack. We have seen Dominic Perrottet call it the Canberra comatosis and essentially said there's been a wasted decade of reform.
Yeah, look, I think he's completely right. I think full credit to Dom Perrottet, the New South Wales Treasurer. I think he's one of the few senior politicians in Australia who actually wants to do serious policy, and he's trying to do that from Australia's biggest state. I think he's trying to work in tandem with Victoria. There are various ideas to swap stamp duty for land tax, etc. I think politically that's a very challenging thing to do. It's certainly a very good thing economically to do, but I think they'd probably need the federal government to get involved to support it in some way. But sadly, just as the Treasurer implies, there seems very little interest for any major policy change in Canberra, and I think Dom Perrottet's characterisation of Canberra is 100% correct.
Is it true? Is it your read, Adam, that if they did persist with that and move stamp duty to land tax, then right off the bat there's a loss of about $1 billion a year in revenue?
Yeah, look, certainly I don't know the exact figures, but that is right. I mean, the problem with the carve-up of the GST between states is it penalises states effectively if they make reforms that boost growth, and certainly that sort of switch would boost growth. I think there's a lot of fear-mongering with land tax. I think one way the states could shift would be to give people the option when they buy a house whether they would prefer to pay stamp duty, which in Sydney can be $30,000 to $60,000 on a normal house, or they could pay land tax every year of $1,000 or $2,000. And I think you'd probably find that most people would rather pay the land tax, and then once they'd chosen that, then that particular property would always be a land tax property, and so very gradually over the time the whole state would shift.
It seems like Dominic Perrottet has been banging on about this for quite some time. It's been largely ignored. Can you see it happening realistically?
Well, look, I think there is interest from the Victorian Treasurer, and I wouldn't be surprised if sometime later this year there's a policy announcement by the Victorian Labor government and the New South Wales Liberal government to do something along these lines, but I think probably the premiers in both of those states will be more reluctant to go along with it. I think that's probably the immediate problem for this policy.
And the other point I think is at the heart of this too, Adam, is that Dominic Perrottet, you know, his push for reform when it comes to taxation can only really be achieved if the length of terms are extended federally from 3 years to 4 years, let's say. But that's really, is that ever going to happen?
We need a referendum.
Look, I mean, it could happen at the federal level. I mean, I think it's kind of marginal. I think it's more the quality of the politicians that matter more, and just the zeitgeist, I guess. Not so much whether it's 3 or 4 year terms. I think the crop of politicians in New South Wales is in a reform sense better. I mean, of course they have a slightly larger margin in their parliament too. That helps. But yeah, look, I mean, full credit to the New South Wales government for thinking these things anyway.
Yeah.
Let's talk about gas just quickly, because we've seen a big push here, and gas is kind of being talked about as the saviour when it comes to, as Paul Kelly described it this morning. It was a wonderful line. Scott Morrison caught between a immovable object and an irresistible force, which is emissions reduction and climate change. But in New South Wales, for example, there's still a moratorium, at least a part moratorium on gas exploration, isn't there?
Yes, look, that's right. But I think there's been a recent deal that the New South Wales government has to come up with quite a lot of extra gas over the next few years, and they'll probably get that by, at least in part, lifting the moratorium. I think that would be a very good thing. Australians pay extraordinarily too much for gas. In fact, our businesses are paying more for gas than countries that don't have any gas, and yet, we're one of the biggest gas exporters in the world. So it's completely crazy. So part of the solution to that is to increase supply, and I think that's what will emerge from this deal with New South Wales. I mean, as for climate change, it's a very crucial ingredient. If we're going to have a lot of solar and wind, then we also have to have a lot of gas power stations to basically, keep the lights on when it's not sunny or windy. So that's absolutely critical.
This figure that was in the paper that the Business Council came up with, Adam, the cost of about $20 billion a year over the next 10 years, I mean, is that achievable?
Well, no, look, I don't think politically it's achievable. I mean, that is an extraordinary amount of money, $22 billion a year. And the reality is the number of renewable projects has actually dried up at the moment. The renewable energy target, as far as I know, has been reached. I think it's 33 terawatt hours a year or something like that. So we already have that capacity. So future projects, I think, are being less subsidised, if you like. And lo and behold, there aren't as many new projects. So I think, it's a real mess.
All right.
On that happy note, Adam, we'll see you soon.
Yes, indeed. See you next week.